Thomas Jefferson Brown by James Oliver Curwood. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Roger Moline. Thomas Jefferson Brown by James Oliver Curwood. There are not many who will remember him as Thomas Jefferson Brown. For 10 years he had been mildly ashamed of himself, and out of respect for people who were dead, and for a dozen or so who were living, he had the good taste to drop his last name. The fact that it was only Brown didn't matter. "Tack Thomas Jefferson to Brown," he said, "and you've got a name that sticks." It had an aristocratic sound, and Thomas Jefferson, with the Brown cut off, was still aristocratic when you came to count the red corpuscles in him. In some sort of way he was related to 2 dead presidents, 3 dead army officers, a living college professor, and a few common people. He was legitimately born to the purple, but fate had sent him off on a curious ricochet in a game all of its own, and changed him from Thomas Jefferson Brown into just plain Thomas Jefferson without the Brown. He was one of those specimens who, when you meet them, somehow make you feel there are a few lost kings of the earth, as well as lost lambs. He was what we called a first sighter. That is, you liked him the instant you looked at him. You knew without further acquaintance that he was a man whom you could trust with your money, your friendship, anything you had. He was big, with a wholesome brown face, blond hair, and gray eyes that seemed always to be laughing and twinkling, even when he was hungry. He carried about with him a load of cheerfulness so big that it was constantly spilling over on other people. There was a time when Thomas Jefferson Brown had little white cards with his name on them. That was when he went to college, and his lungs weren't so good. It was then that some big doctor told him that if he wanted to live to have grandchildren, the best thing for him to do was to tramp it for a while, live out of doors, sleep out of doors, do nothing but breathe fresh air and walk. That doctor was Fate, playing his game behind a pair of spectacles and a bumpy forehead. He saved Thomas Jefferson Brown all right, but he turned him into a plain Thomas Jefferson. For Thomas Jefferson Brown never got over taking his medicine. He kept on tramping. He got big and broad and happy. Somewhere, perhaps in a barn, he caught a microbe that made him dislike ordinary work. He would set to and help a farmer saw wood all day, just for company and grub. But you couldn't hire him to go into an office, or settle down to anything steady for $25 a day. He had a scientific name for the thing that was in him, the wanderlust bug, I think he called it, and he said it was better than the Chinese ladybugs that the government imports to save California fruit. The nearest Thomas Jefferson ever came to going back to Thomas Jefferson Brown was when he took a job at braking on the Southern Pacific. That held him for 3 days less than 2 weeks. "The wanderlust bug wouldn't stand for it," he explained. Right after that he struck a farmer's house where the farmer was sick, almost dying, with 3 little kids and a frail little woman trying to keep things up. He worked like 10 men for more than a month on that farm, and when he went away he wouldn't take a cent. That's the sort of ne'er-do-well Thomas Jefferson was. He wouldn't beg. He'd go 3 days without grub and laugh all the time. It was mostly in the country and in small villages that he made his living. He could play 7 different kinds of instruments without any instruments at all. Did it all with his mouth. And the kids, they went wild over him. In return for his entertainment, Thomas Jefferson wasn't ashamed to take whatever came to him in the way of odd nickels and dimes. Once the manager of a vaudeville house heard him on a street corner and offered him a job at $50 a week if he'd sign a contract for 12 weeks. "Good Lord," said Thomas Jefferson, "I wouldn't know what to do with $600. The next week he was cooking in a lumber camp for his board. That's Thomas Jefferson, or rather, that's what he was. And now we're coming to the girl who killed the bug in Thomas Jefferson and rescued the king. She was born swell. She has blue eyes, the sort that can light up a dark day and can make your head turn dizzy when they smile at you. And she's got the right sort of hair to go with 'em, red and gold and brown all mixed up, until you can't tell which is which, the sort that makes you wonder if some big artist hasn't been painting a picture for you when you see it out in the sunshine. She comes of a titled family, but she'd want to die tomorrow if Thomas Jefferson Brown didn't worship her from the tips of her little toes to the top of her pretty head. She thinks he's a king, and he is, one of those great big healthy kings that nature sometimes grows when it has half a chance. It's curious how the whole thing happened. Thomas Jefferson wandered up to Portland at the time we were fitting out a ship for a whaling cruise. We saw him imitating a banjo for a lot of kids down at the wharf, and the minute our eyes lit on him, Tucker's and mine, we liked him. It isn't necessary to go into the details of what happened after that. Just a week later, when Thomas Jefferson and I were shaking hands for the last time, a queer sort of look came into his eyes, and he said, "Bobby, you're the first man I ever knew that makes me feel like crying when you leave me." He said it just like one of the kids he'd tickled half to death on the wharf. There was a little jerking in his throat, and there came into his face a look so gentle that it made me think of a girl. "Why don't you come along on this cruise with me?" I said. Thomas Jefferson gave a sudden start, and a queer expression came into his eyes, as if he saw something out on the sea that had startled him. Then he laughed. You could hear that laugh of Thomas Jefferson's 3 blocks away, and sunshine in winter couldn't bring more cheer than the sound of it. He looked at me for a moment, and then said, "Bobby, I'll go." It wasn't 48 hours before Thomas Jefferson had a first mortgage on every soul aboard the Sleeping Sealer, from the captain to the oiler down to the engine room. He was able, all right, but you couldn't have made an able seaman out of him in 100 years. For all that, he did the work of 3 men. The first thing you heard when you woke up in the morning was his whistle, and the last thing you heard at night was his laugh or his song. He did everything, from cooking to telling us why Germany couldn't lick England, and how the United States could clean up the map of the earth if Congress would spend less money on job-making bureaus and a little more on warships. Then we discovered what was in the old alligator skin valise he carried. It was books. Half the time he didn't have to read to us, but just talked of the stuff he'd learned by heart. We got to know a lot before the trip was half begun just by associating with Thomas Jefferson Brown, or Thomas Jefferson as he was then. We spent 3 months up about the Spicer Islands, and then came down toward Southampton Land. Thomas Jefferson was the happiest man aboard until we caught sight of a coast, and then the change began. After that he'd get restless whenever land hove in sight. 6 weeks later we came down into Rose Welcome Sound, planning to get out through Hudson Strait before winter set in. The fact that we were almost homeward bound didn't seem to affect Thomas Jefferson. I saw the beginning of the end when he came to me one day. "Bobby, I've never seen this northern country. It's a big, glorious country, and I'd like to go ashore." There wasn't any use arguing with him. The captain tried it, we all tried it, and at last Thomas Jefferson prepared to take his leave of us at Point Fullerton, just 800 miles north of civilization,